Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out at the range to talk about the new Colt M5 rifle. Colt first debuted this rifle in 2017 at an overseas trade show, and they've made some difference to the gun that's now on the market some 5 years later. It's an interesting design. They've made some pretty unique changes to the gun, even though it might not look like it outwardly. And there's a couple of quality issues I have with the gun, but we're going to talk about all that in today's video. So let's get started talking about the new Colt M5 rifle. The new M5 rifle isn't the same thing, obviously, as the new military M5, which is the SIG Spear. But this gun was developed in 2017 or earlier, debuted in 2017, and it had adopted that M5 moniker already long before the Spear was adopted. Now, I suspect Colt was chasing a military contract and law enforcement contracts when they developed this rifle. And again, they made some pretty significant changes to the overall design, which we're going to talk about in the video. And let's start off talking about the stock and work our way forward. So back here we have a Magpul CTR stock. This is a mil-spec buffer tube. It is properly staked at the castle nut, and it does have 6 positions in adjustability. Coming forward, we have a standard A2 pistol grip. We have a Magpul trigger guard in there versus just a standard straight aluminum mil-spec. We have Ambi Controls on the selector lever. A standard A2 style forward assist. On top, we have a Colt marked Radian charging handle. So that's a nice charging handle. And then above that, we have Troy iron sights. So we have a Troy sight in the rear and a Troy sight out here on front on the handguard. Standard A2 deflector, standard A2 or A1 ejection port cover. Mag release, which is Ambi. We'll show you the other side of the rifle here in a minute. And then we have a bolt release on the right-hand side of the rifle. This bolt release is not a bolt hold open, so you can drop the bolt. But if you go to try to lock the bolt back, there's no real way to do it with this control on the right-hand side of the receiver. You're still going to have to use the ping pong paddle on the left-hand side of the receiver to lock your bolt open. But for a magazine change, drop the magazine out, insert a fresh one, hit the button, and the gun loads. I find this to be inferior to something like the LWRC design, as an example, which allows you to both lock the bolt open and release the bolt. Coming over to the left-hand side of the rifle, standard fire controls, standard mil-spec type trigger, but what's not standard are the pins. Now, we did take a measurement of this receiver and an earlier Colt receiver, and the receiver wall thicknesses are the same, but what is not the same, the pins are longer on this gun. So if you go to put a Geissele trigger in it or something like that, you're going to need longer pins or reuse the pins that come with the rifle. Here we have our ping pong paddle, but you'll notice this area is kind of different. Here's our Ambi mag release right here. And the bottom of the mag well comes out and extends out here to kind of prevent you from accidentally hitting it. So it takes a deliberate motion to drop that magazine out. And as we move forward, we have a pick rail across the top of the receiver, and then you have a big dovetail here that goes into this proprietary handguard, which runs all the way out about a 15-inch length M-LOK handguard. The rifle is running a carbine length gas system, and it seems to be pretty well gassed. It is a pleasant shooting rifle. The gas block is pinned in place, so there's no screws or anything holding it in place. And then there is, notice this is a little bit interesting. So the barrel is cut so that it has a shelf that the gas block butts up against, but there's also a ring, like a shim, behind the gas block, and then the gas block is pinned in place. On the end, we have a standard A2 type bird cage, and then 1/2 by 28 threads out there on the end of the 16-inch barrel, which is 1-in-7 twist and chrome lined. And we'll talk about the internals of the gun when we take the gun apart. What's really interesting is how this rail system works on the gun. This is not a conventional rail system, and the upper receiver is not your regular run-of-the-mill M4 or any other type of AR-15 upper Colt's ever produced. It's unique to itself, and it interfaces with this handguard. And we'll show you some images of that and how it works. We'll talk a little bit more about how it does work in the next segment. So one last thing I want to point out is I do have a sight mark red dot sight on here, and it is the Mini Shot M-Spec, and it comes with 2 different mounts, a low mount for 1913 rail, then a high mount like I have here on the Colt M5. It has a, I think the battery on this thing is a 16 It's a different, it's not a 2032. Yeah, it's a CR1632. So it's a slightly smaller battery. You can access it from the top here. You unscrew this. So you don't have to take the sight off the mount and lose your zero. You can swap the batteries out. Shuts off after 12 hours. Has a 3 MOA reticle. And I've been playing with Sightmark red dot sights for some time because they're very affordable. And it's this is another example of one of the sight marks we play with. They're out here in the shooting shack that we'll slap on guns for testing just to see how the sights are holding up. So far, all of our Sightmark sights are holding up pretty well. Again, they're a very affordable option out there for those of you that are looking for a red dot sight. With all that being said, I just wanted to explain that. So with that being said, let's do some shooting with the gun, take it apart, look on the inside, because we've kind of touched upon the features, but there's a couple of quality issues that are a little bit concerning to me. A lot of folks ask me, how can I get involved in the firearms business in that particular community? And one of the best ways to do that is to become a gunsmith. Every gunsmith I know is just overbooked with work. It's a very good living. And so if you would like to become a gunsmith, you need to go to a gunsmithing school or become an apprentice for an existing gunsmith. But Modern Gun School is an accredited college that also works with veterans in the GI Bill, where you can go and get a degree from accredited college in gunsmithing and then go out and start your own gunsmithing business, which I think is a really great option. Again, throughout my entire life, gunsmiths have always been able to earn a really good living, assuming they have a really strong work ethic. So please check out Modern Gun School. I do have a link in the video description below. The LWRC has Ambi charging handle, much like the Radian being used on the M5. And we're shooting that 62 grain ball again. All right, so the recoil impulse is a little bit more pronounced on this gun. It's a little bit overgassed. In my personal opinion, for a defensive rifle, I want it a little bit overgassed because it's going to resist fouling and the encroachment of, foreign material, dirt, mud, sand, water, whatever. Now, this isn't really a fair comparison because it has the SCW stock on it. Let's go ahead and, let's see. There we go. Lengthen this just a little bit. Turn my American Defense red dot sight on here. Charge it up. Now, this one doesn't have an Ambi charging handle, so it's just the old school T handle. You know what's funny is even that with that truncated recoil system in this gun, it's a pretty smooth shooting rifle still. Is it as smooth as the M5? Well, let's find out. Oops. The M5 is nice and light, doesn't feel as muzzle heavy as the LWRC. Definitely have nice real estate out here as compared to the 6940. All right, of the three, definitely the smoothest shooting in terms of recoil impulse. So it's like almost perfectly gassed. But again, I like my rifles just a little bit over-gassed for defensive purposes. So now let's take this bad boy apart, take a look on the inside, because there's some things in here that are going to be different than your standard AR-15. So first we're going to make sure the weapon is empty by pulling the magazine out, which is already out. I'm going to pull the bolt to the rear, check the chamber. Chamber is clear, there's no round chambered. Now I can start the disassembly process. Nothing special here. You have your standard 2 push pins, and this upper will pin to any standard AR-15 lower. There's nothing all that special about the lower outside of the Ambi Controls. And we'll take the bolt and carrier out, and then the T-handle. All right. So let's kind of touch upon some of the things that are good and bad about the rifle. So back here, we can get a good shot of the staking that's done to the castle nut. Here on the lower receiver, we like to call this super civilianized. They've left this little bridge here that would prevent you from using a registered auto sear or anything like that. I would imagine triggers like the Fostech Echo, which has an ATF letter, probably wouldn't fit into this lower receiver because of how they've machined it here. It's non-standard. If you go forward, you can see now how the Ambi controls work in conjunction with the paddle on the left-hand side. So when I push down on it, you can see how it raises this little lever out and brings up the bolt stop. And inside there, you have just a standard AR-15 trigger, but once again, keep in mind, which has the safety cut into the hammer, keep in mind these pins are longer than your standard AR-15 that is out there, a current production AR-15. Everything else, pretty much the same. Let's talk about the bolt carrier. No real changes here. It is a full auto type carrier, even though you can't put an auto sear in it. We have a properly staked gas key here. And then use my disassembly tool here, get my cotter pin out, drop my firing pin out. Now, the first time we took this gun apart, when we pulled the bolt out of the carrier, one of the piston rings just fell off, and I'll show you what that looks like. And I just took it out and it didn't fall off this time. The tension on these gas rings seems to be off. When I put it back on, it just like fell into place. And when putting the bolt back in the carrier, you kind of have to move it around, which isn't uncommon for a new gun, but what's concerning is one of the gas rings did pop off. Now, there's misinformation out there saying if one or two of the gas rings are missing or whatever on an AR-15, it won't cycle. That's simply not true. The gun will still work, but you don't want your gas rings falling off. So that would be one of the negatives. Standard firing pin. The carrier is going to have a C mark on it, very faint, but we've talked about that in a previous video of another Colt rifle that we talked about. And then, of course, the internal of the carrier is chrome lined. The bolt itself has MPC on it, so it is inspected, and it's a mil-spec bolt. Here's our Radian charging handle that's Colt marked. I'll show you what the forging codes look like on the upper receiver. There's two different codes present. I would imagine whoever forged the upper, because in talking to Chris over at Small Arms Solutions, Colt doesn't really manufacture their own guns anymore. I don't know if that's the case with the new M5 upper and lowers, but there are some issues with the current production of these guns, and we'll get into that here in just 1 second. So it has standard M4 feed ramps in there, and part of the rail system is designed so that, based upon Colt literature, we can't visually verify this because it takes a special wrench to get this barrel nut out. They claim that this new chamber design is intended to bring heat away from the chamber, transfer it to the receiver and the handguard, and basically radiate that heat away. And if you take a look at how this handguard mounts, we'll roll in some pictures. You have two screws here that pinch it in place. We have an index tab that keeps it from rotating, so it's going to be a very rigid mount. But the receiver is machined differently, kind of has a stop sign look to it back here. And then there's this extension that comes out that is part of the upper receiver, machined into the upper receiver, that the handguard then attaches to. Then the barrel nut sets down inside, recessed into this machined ring that goes with this handguard, and that's why we say it's proprietary. Now, early information about this gun said it used a Geisley rail, and now it's just simply marked Colt. It's not marked Geisley, and it is definitely proprietary. The profile on the barrel is just kind of a medium profile barrel, has plenty of step cuts in it to try to lighten it. And here's where we get into some of the quality concerns. Now, first of all, I talked about the rings just falling off the bolt. I don't expect that to happen. I've never had that happen before in my entire life, and I've shot and owned a lot of AR-15s. And so that's a bit concerning about the quality of some of the components they're using, and probably outsourced parts. If you look at the front of this receiver, it has a forging flashing mark here on the front that every other Colt rifle I've ever seen in my entire life, it just simply doesn't have. It's uneven, it's unsightly, and I did pick this rifle up from our friends over at Classic Firearms. They got it from a distributor. I confirmed with the distributor that the rifles they have in stock, in fact, have this unfinished part here. Generally speaking, this would be machined smoothed before the lower receiver is finished. And then I also found one other image on the internet of one of these rifles that was posted in the last few weeks, and it too had that unsightly ridge there, which is just shoddy and cheap in my opinion. When you're going to pay $2,000 for a gun like this, that's what its full retail is, having unsightly, unfinished machining or forge flashing on the lower receiver just simply isn't acceptable. It just isn't. That needs to be rectified, because if you compare this to other guns on the market, say at LWRC, which has a fully functioning Ambi release on the receiver and guns like that, this is at the same price point. So I'm expecting this rifle to be competitive with Sig Vertus and LWRC and LMT. I'm expecting it to be competitive. And I don't find it to be, because that to me was really concerning. It's the first thing I noticed when I pulled it out of the box. Now, when shooting the rifle, Colt has historically done a pretty good job gassing the rifles. The military overgasses its M4s, and that's done by design. This rifle has a carbine length gas system in it, but it has a very muted recoil impulse. It's slow enough where you can feel the carrier actually move inside the receiver, bottom out, and go forward. If you're shooting a standard Colt M4 that's overgassed, it happens so fast that you don't really feel the carrier moving. You just get that recoil impulse. So you can actually feel this bolt carrier going back and forth during the cycling. And so it's appropriately gassed. And if you want to, go with a larger port size, you're gonna have to do that yourself. So that's pretty much everything that I've seen on the gun. We did take it completely apart, took the handguards off, tried to find every little detail we could, because if you look at the Colt website, they just have a paragraph just giving you a marketing pitch on the gun. They don't break down the specs. I couldn't find anything out there. Everything that has been posted from 2017 to present is just regurgitating Colt marketing material. It doesn't give us actual specs on any of the parts. So we were left to try to figure out what we could on our own and comparing it to previous generations of Colt rifles. When I got the rifle, it shipped in just a standard cardboard box. In that cardboard box was a military-style cleaning kit, manual, and things like that, and a magazine. The gun also came with the Troy sights, but the rear sight and the front sight were both loose on the rifle. The rear sight was actually wobbling. So if you do pick one up, make sure that you check your sights if you're going to use them. Make sure they're tightened down, because these were loose. On top, it's also worth noting, for a military rifle, or one that was intended for military contracts, on the pick rail, it does not have T markings in the slots like you'll find on other guns, even other Colt guns that are out there. So you don't have those T markings for removing and putting accessories back on and getting them in the exact same position. Now, with that being said, let's do a quick test of the gun with different magazines. We will be shooting some 62 grain American Eagle ball from Federal. We'd like to thank our friends over at Federal for supplying the ammunition free of charge to the channel. It truly helps us out quite a bit. All right, this is a standard Snag magazine, OK Industries. I don't think they're making these anymore, but it's a military contract magazine, and we have 10 rounds loaded. All right, the bolt release is in a good spot. You're not going to confuse it with the magazine release is in a good spot. You're not going to confuse it with the bolt release. It takes a different movement. So now I insert the magazine, I reach up, I drop that bolt. That is a standard PMag. It's an older one without the over-insertion stop. This is a newer generation PMag that has the over-insertion stop on it. And this is a Lancer magazine. All the magazines drop free and clear and seem to function just fine on the M5. So what are my overall thoughts on this particular gun? Well, first of all, it's wildly overpriced for what it is, in my opinion. There are other guns out on the market that have more features, that have a reputation for quality, that costs hundreds of dollars less. Guns like the LWRC. So my first gripe about the gun is it's just way overpriced. And I suspect that's because they had to tool up to make a completely different upper and a completely different lower for this M5 series of rifles. So you're paying for that if you decide to buy one, because the original AR-15 upper and lowers, the M4s, for example, that are popular today, that R&D was paid for decades ago. So I suspect that's why the price is so high on these rifles. Now, the handguard is nice. If you're going to use a non-monolithic upper, it is a good option. I mean, this sucker's on there nice and tight. Downside, proprietary barrel nut. Needs a special tool to get in there to get the barrel out of the gun. I haven't seen one for sale, and I guess I'll have to check the Colt website. You can do the same, see if they even offer the thing for sale. So that is another concern. But my other concern, and the one that just grabbed me right at the moment I took the gun out of the box, with this new forging system, they're not finishing the front of the magazine well. This is completely unsightly and does not belong in a $2,000 plus gun. So I would do a hard pass on this thing. Personally, I just don't see that its features are different enough from existing products on the market with outstanding reputation. Colt has a reputation for going in and out of business. They're in and out of bankruptcy, and now they've merged with CZ in some way. If you take a look at their logo, Colt is above CZ in the name. It's called the Colt CZ Group. And I'm really concerned that Colt's lack of attention to detail may bleed over into CZUSA products. I hope that isn't the case. I hope I'm wrong there. Pure speculation on my part. So light rifle, shoots very nice, nicely gassed with a nice lightweight red dot sight like this little sight mark that we have on there. It's a handy gun. And so it's nice. It's just not $2,000 nice. So yeah, you be your own judge. If you want one of these things just because you want one, I mean, who knows what the status of these will be in 5 years? They may not even make them anymore because Colt has a tendency, like many other companies, to discontinue products that don't sell well. And I really can't see this selling all that well. And it didn't become the U.S. military M5. Something else did. All right, guys, I look forward to your comments down below. We do read those comments because many times you'll give us suggestions for future videos. If you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel so we can continue to bring you content like this, please consider becoming part of our Patreon family. There is a link in the video description below. Also, right here on YouTube, you got the little join button underneath the video player you're watching right now. Mash that join button, and you can support us here in the age of demonetization. And last but not least, please swing by, check out Copper Custom. Thank you for 14 years of support, and we will talk to you guys soon.